where should we start? I mean, the data that we generate is absolutely extraordinary. Perhaps you guys could lay out where you see the biggest risks.
Hi, everyone. I'm State Senator Kevin Thomas from New York. I'm the chairman of the Consumer Protection Committee as well. I was born here in Dubai, and now I'm a senator up in New York. So it's...
I didn't know.
They call me the Dubai-born senator here when they do report. So when I got elected, one of the biggest priorities that I had was looking at data privacy. You have GDPR in Europe. You have California with their consumer protection laws there, but New York does not have anything. The federal system does not have one singular law that covers this. It does cover medical information, it does cover banking information, but personal information that we have, and we have gotten used to giving up so much information about us for convenience. This phone that I carry, and most of us already know this, has so much information on us. And we need to have more control over what others have on us. And data is now more valuable than oil. Sorry to the oil and gas companies here. So we need to have the government step in, because it to me is the wild, wild west.
It really does feel like the Wild Wild West. Pick up on that.
It does, and I think for a lot of companies that are serious in this space, we don't want it to be honest. I think the role of government in lots of other industries, whether it's in life sciences or healthcare, food safety, is to create a level playing field and to make sure that our people feel safe, but also that our companies can act and understand where what the parameters are. And so for a lot of us, we actually look forward to working with government to find a way to create architectures where there's clarity. And we seek clarity. So for a lot of companies, GDPR is a very, very difficult legislation to live under. But for a lot of companies, it's actually a relief, because you know what the parameters are. And you can then begin investing. And the worst thing we can do is to look at a Wild West and say, well, we don't know whether we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And so for a lot of private industry, what we want to do is to work with people like the senator here to sort of create that environment. And looking to what governments can do, we are actively seeking out environments where we understand what the playing field is and what the constraints are. And so rather than shying away from places with difficult legislation, we actually lean in and want to be there first. For us as a company, for example, our first forays into Europe were in the Nordics, which are the most difficult places to operate from a compliance perspective. Difficult to operate in from being able to use data to make your products better. Real teeth behind enforcement of privacy legislation. But the reason we were there first is because if we can operate there, we can operate anywhere in the world. Right? It's sort of like if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what companies are looking for, at least the serious players.
Senator, you'd like to legislate in this area.
Yes.
You'd like federal legislation, but that seems like a stretch at the moment.
Well, not to criticize the federal government in the US, but they won't be able to agree on whether the sun will rise tomorrow. So, we have to, in states like New York, we have to step up. And this is why I introduced the New York Privacy Act, and does exactly that, giving consumers more control over the data that is being collected. So if you go to the European Union and you try to go to a website, there's going to be a pop-up saying, all right, this is the data broker that's going to be collecting your information and for this purpose. In New York, you'll be able to do that if this bill does pass as law. It can also allow you to delete incorrect information. And also what this does that other states don't have in their privacy laws is giving something called a private right of action for unconscionable behavior. So when the government needs to see a pattern, so in New York, for example, my bill gives the Attorney General, the New York Attorney General, the power to sue a data company or a social media company that violates the provisions under this law. But they usually look for high volume, meaning they want to see a pattern, they want to see how many people this affected. But an individual that has the private right of action for unconscionable behavior gets sued, this is another way a company can be held accountable. It's like you walking into a restaurant, you want not just for the food to taste good, but you also want them to follow the health standards. You don't want to have a stomach problem once you leave the place. All right, so that's the kind of analogy I want to use when I talk about data privacy and what information is out there and how we hold these companies accountable.
What about enforcement? Because legislation's one thing, but enforcing it's often part of the problem.
I'd agree. I think it's very interesting to watch this play out in different places. The European Union has said that they want to become a regulatory superpower.
They love regulation.
They love regulation. The question is, though, everybody, at least in private industry, is mostly terrified of the SEC, right? The U.S. has teeth behind enforcement, and it makes people take things like securities laws very seriously. And I think this is an incredibly important part of this debate and discussion, is sort of the legislation is important, but really in the enforcement actions and sort of who is it that you have to work with to make sure that this works. And the US approach is a very confrontational approach. We see that evolving in crypto, for example. It's all about confrontation, whereas I think the Emirates is a good example of actually a dialogue and trying to find a way to work together with industry to create a playing field that works. But at the end of the day, you've got to create a little bit of terror in the C-suite of companies, really believing that if they don't comply, they will have a tough time. And the question is, what are the agencies that will do that, and how, in New York State, I don't know how you guys are conceiving of that actually working.
So, if I can respond to that. So we have the New York Attorney General that will be empowered to file a lawsuit when they see a pattern of behavior that warrants action. That's why in my bill, it also allows for an individual to file an action based off of unconscionable behavior. So it's not where trial attorneys go into court and file frivolous lawsuits. This is where there is damages and there is unconscionable behavior that points to such an action.
I mean, Palantir works with lots of government agencies, so you probably have great insight into what the shortcomings are in terms of data protection in different jurisdictions and where the gaps are.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of ways to look at this. When we think about data protection, we often think about, in the US context, sort of what can private companies do with data, and how do we constrain that? And I think there are other contexts which are much more about how do we protect our citizens from overreach from government agencies, right? And so how do you keep government agencies compliant? But really the core conversation there is how do we change the conversation from this zero-sum game, sort of, if you can either keep people safe physically, right, or healthy physically, or you can keep their data safe and protect their integrity. And I think we've got to remove that part of the conversation and sort of see, how do we do both, right? How do you create an environment for government agencies where they can both be effective in the administration of government, keeping our citizens safe and secure, but also protect the integrity of those citizens? It's fascinating. I've been in conversations back up to the Nordics with heads of intelligence services where they say, look, my number one concern is actually compliance with oversight of data protection. My second concern is the safety of our citizens. And the reason is, if we're not keeping people's integrity, personal integrity, then we don't have a society that we want to live in. And so it's a really interesting conception that is very different from a lot of other places in the world. And then when you get into a depth of conversation with those people, it's fascinating to see that what they're doing is forcing their agencies and their government really to take this seriously and come up with creative engineering solutions, creative legislative solutions for how you force people to do this. It's like haiku, right? It's like you create constraints, you can still create wonderful poetry. You don't have to be free form in everything. And I think creating those constraints for our government agencies actually engenders a lot of creativity, both from industry and from government, in how to sort of lift both of these things, security and data protection and integrity.
We talk a lot about what our own governments can do to keep us safe, but Senator, what about trusting other governments? I know you're very worried about TikTok, and
Yes.
You're moving to ban it from government devices. Why don't you walk us through that?
Okay, so like I showed you before, this phone here and everyone's phone, it collects a lot of data, a lot of apps that we use, and you have private companies using it to make money. When that kind of information is now with a foreign government, the information that is being collected, is it safe? Where is it going? And there is information to believe that it is going to a foreign company, and we don't know what a foreign country, and we don't know what exactly they're going to be using it for. And that's why I introduced legislation in New York, and several states have already gone forward and banned it altogether. I am going through the process where we are trying to figure out exactly what is happening and how to stop them. But again, the role of government is to protect its citizens, and when there is a national security issue, we are putting that as not as a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is a national security issue, and we need to ban it.
If I could just jump in there, I think the space we're in when it comes to all of these issues is almost like 2008 and the financial crisis, the run up to that. We're in this position then where we have these collateralized debt obligations and everybody's investing right, left, and center. Nobody actually understands how the system works. Nobody understands really behind the scenes what is happening, how is all this stuff being decomposed, where is the risk in the system? And it blew up in our faces because we really didn't understand. And I think there's a lot of naivete right now around this ecosystem, around our data, the companies we're working with. Where does all this end up? Most of the risk we're seeing is sort of third-party risk. Right? Most of the big data breaches we see, cyber risk and data breaches that we see, are all sort of, Target gets, the big US retail chain gets hacked. They didn't get hacked. They're one of the providers of a sub-piece of software for their transaction system that powers the cash registers got hacked. Right? That's 3 levels down from Target. Like, what's their responsibility to make sure that their supplier doesn't get hacked? It's very, very difficult. So you're seeing sort of the same thing, this really crazy system where you pull out your phone, you think you can trust the app you're using, but there are 3 levels of provider down there, and you don't know where that data is flowing. And this is incredibly important. And I think in the same way that we've applied legislation to try to get to the place where our financial system is much safer and much more secure, we need to better understand this whole ecosystem and work between private industry and government to get to the place where we can actually understand what's happening under the hood.
I mean, that's sort of like inception sort of levels of layers of data running through all sorts of different companies. How does that get simplified?
I mean, I think one is the forcing function, right? So you working with government to create legislation and then teeth of enforcement so that there's transparency in this, right? It's sort of like, how do you know our financial system is working? Well, because there's reporting and there's accounting and there are agencies that are watching this. As an agreement between the financial system players and government that we want to create a transparent financial system that works. And I think we can do the same in this data privacy ecosystem where, look, we need to agree on what are the standards here, how do we report, and how do you create transparency in these systems? Right? I think we're moving into this place with artificial intelligence as well. Right? How do you create a world in which we understand the algorithms that are being applied, in which we understand the AI models that are being used, and we could either throw up our hands and say, well, it's too complicated, we don't know how to do that. That would be the same thing as responding to 2008 and saying, well, we will never understand how the global financial system works, so let's not try.
Well, the problem seems overwhelmingly large, and I think with the increasing amounts of data that are generated just through using your phone, even my sort of wearable tech, I wake up, I haven't even got out of bed, it's monitoring my heart rate. Is the gap going to get bigger between how much data there is being created and regulation? Is the gap getting bigger or smaller? Senator?
Well, that's why we need to legislate this very early on. All right, it's like you move into a house and we want to make sure the locks on the doors actually work. So you have to mandate that. You have to make sure that a company has the policy, has the software, has the audits, has the checks. They do this annually to make sure that the information that you provide, like your name, your contact information, now your biometric information, that's a creme de la creme of your data that's out there. That needs to be protected. And that's why in New York, we made sure we updated those rules. And given how our information is then used in the black market, where they create fake credit cards, go on a spending spree, we have to make sure credit reporting agencies are also given notification. So in New York, for example, I passed in 2019 a bill that became law called the SHIELD Act. And what it does is it tells all companies that have information on New Yorkers to update their system, to have regular audits, to make sure that they check for risks. What else does it do? It also says if there is information that leads you to believe that the customer's information has been accessed without authorization, one, they have to be notified. Two, if it's more than 5,000 people, they have to make sure that the credit reporting agencies are told to keep an eye on which accounts are starting up after this hack, in case new accounts are created. The Attorney General is involved, the state police is involved. All of this information, all of these targets have to be met in order to make sure that people are protected and to make sure there is adequate security at these companies.
So we're supposed to be friends up here. It's a nice, friendly panel, but I would respectfully disagree. I think we're in a place where, honestly, yes, we're mandating locks on houses, but industry is building the Burj Al Arab. Like we are at that pace of innovation and building, right? And I would say lots of companies, lots of innovators are actually constrained right now because they don't have a framework to operate under. We need sort of the next SHIELD Act for the world of AI. We needed that yesterday, and there's a window of opportunity here for thinking about sort of this conception of what can government do more broadly and outside of the U.S. The U.S. has a very difficult political context, but there are lots of other environments in the world, like the one we're in now, where there's tremendous opportunity to actually create clarity, mandate the locks, but also mandate the standards for how we're going to keep window washers from falling off the buildings when we're 100 floors up. There's a tremendous amount of room here for people to create space where innovation can happen faster, because we are entering an environment where government agencies providing healthcare are going to have to provide data to private pharmaceutical companies because they're doing personalized medicine. How do you make that link happen, right? How do you keep people's data private, but you have to share incredibly sensitive pieces of information between private industry and government? How do you do that legislatively right now? We don't know.
So we're left with a little bit of disagreement and plenty more that we could get into. We need, again, another hour.
Can I respond to that quickly?
Okay.
So in New York,
quick
we've got HIPAA rules that actually oversee all of what you just said right now. But as the chair of the Consumer Protection Committee, I have oversight over 20 million people in New York and their welfare. For business, privacy is good, and that's what I want to drive today. All right, so thank you so much.
On that we agree.
All right.
On that we agree.
Oh, well, we ended on a positive. It's Valentine's Day. Lots of love on the stage. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.